Hi, welcome to the next episode of TWC's Digital Leadership Series with Salih Sheikh. Hi, Salih.
Hi, Tanya.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Very excited to be talking about people. Probably one of the parts of digital that is really at my heart, having built the team at Bestway. So yeah, really good topic to be covering.
Excellent. Okay, so we're talking people and culture, aren't we? So what does that kind of cover? What's the scope of our discussion today?
Yeah, so I think the context was that I can imagine, again, a bit. It's kind of linked to the infrastructure piece that we were talking about. That it might be quite difficult if you're not as tuned into digital and you're trying to set up a digital side to your business. It might not be as clear kind of what sort of roles, what sort of skills you need. And so it's basically to offer some guidance on that and have a bit of a debate, I suppose, in terms of how do you structure your business to be kind of to have digital at its heart, if that makes sense, and not just a new kind of addition that you've just added on that isn't really integrated across the business.
Yeah, so we want to try and avoid silo working as part of the planning for people and culture. That makes sense. So let's start with skills then, before we look into sort of individual job roles and responsibilities and stuff. What are the types of people that tend to be effective as digital enablers?
So I think, really the most important kind of behavior or skill in that sense is probably curiosity. So I'll start with the really broad ones first. So curiosity is really key, I think, in digital. You are dealing with a lot of data and you've suddenly got this opportunity to really understand on a much more granular level the behaviors of your customers. So having someone who is kind of like hungry and curious to understand what is going on, obviously linked to that then is data analytics skills, is really important, because every piece of data will lead to you making a particular decision in terms of how you set up digital, what you market through digital, how you market it through digital. So to me, that is number one and the most important. Another kind of like maybe a misnomer might be that they need to be coders, or they need to be able to code. We built the team that we built at Bestway. There wasn't really anyone that knew how to code. They all understood code, but they weren't coders. So it's getting kind of the right level of digital expertise. So people who understand digital, who understand how apps, websites, systems work, and are able to manage these systems and manage these platforms, but they don't necessarily need to be kind of the coders, so to speak, if that makes sense. So I think that's another really important one.
So are you saying that you don't actually need to be able to write or read code, but you have to have a kind of high level understanding of how a technical infrastructure works, so that it's rules based, and that how you can extract data and input data and that kind of thing? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, definitely. And then so completely agree. And then the other thing is just, I guess, like user experience, and like again, really important that people who join digital have the customer at their heart, that they understand customer behaviors, that they are able to almost empathize with some of the pain points customers go through. But again, like the data bit is the most important thing. So you can pick up through things like heat mapping. You can pick up that there's a problem with this page. Customers keep dropping off this page. This is the point at which the customer journey is ending. Therefore, what's the problem with it? What is a customer struggling with, and how do I fix it, so to speak? So it's a really logical, like you say, it's a really logical kind of skill set. And then probably the one last thing I would add to it is when you're hiring, I think it's really beneficial to have people who've worked in e-commerce rather than just more broadly in digital. And part of the reason for that is that you're a bit like any retail business. You're trading goods, and it's your platform is not just about communicating; it's about selling. So it's much more kind of fast paced, a bit like wholesale in that sense, right? It's much more fast paced rather than just something that is more static, if that makes sense. And so having people who are able to work at that pace becomes really important, so that you can make changes quickly and learn from data and adapt fast.
Yeah, and it sounds like attention to detail is a kind of prerequisite on this, because whenever I've watched things about companies like Amazon, there is this piece of literally tracking customers to understand what they're doing, which I guess is what actually used to happen in the retail mults years ago. But there was so much learning on customer behavior done that it's pretty established. Whereas I guess this is all new in e-commerce.
Yeah, I mean, God, the opportunities are endless. There's so much data at your fingertips. If you get it right, if you can set up kind of your Google Analytics properly, if you can set up things like heat mapping, yeah, then you've got so much data at your fingertips, so much understanding of how customers behave. And, you know, to be frank, a lot of it could also help with understanding customers offline, not just online. So it's a really valuable source of data. And so, you know, I guess like being analytical is probably another. So, you know, this kind of idea of being really curious, but also really analytical becomes really important. And then, you know, like I say, the third one for me is it's almost empathetic. You know, I've always, in every marketing role and team that I've been in, I've always said it's one of the most important things is to be empathetic so that you can put yourself in your customer's shoes, and kind of understand what they're going through. It's actually probably the first skill that I look for when I'm hiring anyone into my team. So it's, and you know, I think that's really valuable in kind of teams like this.
That's a really tough mix. So you want a detailed analyst with high emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have to have all of those things together, but as long as you've got a good balance across the team. But you know, I'm sure. I mean, I think back to my team, and actually, they were all brilliant at that. In you know, the breadth of those skills. They all were quite really, like, they were young, hungry, analytical, curious, like really curious, which was what was so great working with them. They just felt constantly really energized, which was, you know, amazing. They really wanted to understand what was going on. And then, you know, the guys who are then adapting based on that data and insight, the guys who are then adapting how the platforms worked, they were also really like, you know, keen to get things done quick, to test, you know, to put up a test as quickly as possible so that they can learn from that test and then decide what they're going to do to adapt the website. So I mean, those people definitely exist.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna, from that skill set that we've just covered, we kind of need to talk about how those skills fit into roles. But I suppose it depends on the size of your business and the scale of your ambition as to how many people you have. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, don't hemorrhage, don't bring on huge amounts of cost and hemorrhage your business. I think, you know, I guess from the outset, one thing that's that I found is that, you know, ideally I would love to have had a team of 30, 40 people like some of the mults, but you know, that's just not a reality in our industry. So I guess I got to this is my perspective, I suppose, on it, but I got to a point where I thought there were, like, you know, 3 or 4 roles that were really key, and they may not be, you know, 3 or 4 people. You can share those roles as well in fewer people, but I guess 3 or 4, let's call it disciplines that I think are really important to have within your team. So, and you know, you can almost track them across a customer journey. So they're almost linear in that sense. So the first one that I think is essential is having someone who is your kind of product manager. So the digital product manager effectively is someone who is in charge of your digital products, who owns the build of your apps, who owns the build of your websites. They're the ones that are they have a much more technical understanding of digital. They don't need to be coders. Great if they can, but they don't need to be coders. Enough for them to just understand it. They're the people who need to understand kind of how systems will integrate together, for example, and how data will flow from one system to another. And so they're almost like the architects, right? They're the builders, and they liaise very closely with IT more than anyone else probably, and then you know, kind of then with the wider digital team. So that is essentially role number 1. Role number 2, I said discipline number 1. Discipline number 2, it then rolls on to your kind of digital optimization person. So, you know, once you've built this thing, that's not the end of the game. And I think that's something we're going to talk about later in the series. So you're not done. Then it's about constantly looking at it and adapting it and learning from it. So you want someone who, so the person who runs your optimization should be someone, again, who's very, very analytical, who is, great with data, who is able to use things like Data Studio, understands how heat mapping works, and then and then is able to apply that to kind of the layout of your website or the layout of your app. Look at what areas of the website and the app are working well, what areas are not, and then very quickly, basically, in the way that digital does, find a solution, get it ready to, it doesn't have to be 100%, get it ready to 80% and test it, and then see what the difference is. See, does it bring in more people? Does it, or does it actually have the opposite effect? So that, that then becomes the regular kind of change to your platform through your digital optimization person. Oh, go on.
I was going to say, and for those two roles, I guess part of this is what the role is, and then part of it is kind of how you measure that the person is performant in their role. So is it a case of KPIs? Do they all slot together? How does it work in terms of measuring efficacy?
Yeah, so I think look, with any team, it's really important to have a couple of shared overall goals, overall targets. So, the obvious one kind of being sales, and perhaps customer satisfaction across the three of them. But if you break down kind of each individual discipline, then the person who's in charge of your product, the two most important KPIs, I guess, are satisfaction. So whatever they're building should be there to satisfy the customer. And the second thing is almost like a project manager, which is, it's almost like an initiative by initiative or a project by project. Is it done to timelines and to cost, for example? That I would say is probably the more important one for the person in charge of product.
And I guess if there's functionality issues with it, if it's buggy and stuff like that, they're the role that's responsible for smoothing all of that out and making sure it's optimum.
Exactly, and maybe even response rate and how quickly they can resolve issues. So that's probably the product, the KPIs for the product discipline. And then for optimization, it's probably slightly different. So for optimization, it's probably, again, it's definitely customer satisfaction, because you're attempting to adapt and change the websites and the apps to make them more user friendly as much as possible. So satisfaction plays a really key role. But then also there could be things like average order value, sales, everything you're doing should be driving people to, either, it depends on what the purpose of what you're building is, but if you're trying to build something to help the experience be more efficient, then it might be based on the amount of time that you spend on the website, for example, or it could be the opposite. You want them to be shopping for longer. So it kind of depends on what your objective is. But for them, it's all around those sorts of metrics. How long are people staying on certain pages? How many pages are they visiting? You can get really, really granular, like I said, because it's such an analytical role.
I guess it's about the stickiness, basically, of the customer, isn't it? That what you're wanting to do is grab customers and hold on to them and then grow the relationship.
Exactly. So it's almost like, stickiness and happiness, let's say. those are the two that are really important for the optimization role.
Okay.
And then just following that further down the kind of customer journey. So you've now had the person who's in charge of building products. You've got the person who's in charge of then almost maintaining and improving them as time goes on. And then you've got digital marketing. So you've got, the person, the people who are in charge of then really communicating and what is communicated to customers. So that can be a combination of like how you, what promotions, what products, etc., you want to push through the website or the app on the front page, in the different advertising spaces, but also things like email and other forms of outbound communication to customers. And for those guys, obviously, so communication skills really important for them to know, almost to be really disciplined in terms of not over communicating, not saying things simply and efficiently, and also in a way that is encouraging people to behave in the way that you want them to, whether that be buy more or visit more, etc. But they're like, I guess the most important thing for them is customer footfall. That's their KPI. So that could be amount of customers visiting on a monthly basis. That could be number of times in a week a customer visits, but it's all about frequency and how often those guys, so your customers are shopping. And then also, again, a little bit around average order value, because they might have campaigns, for example, that are designed around driving people to purchase more items. So it's also it's a mixture of kind of the frequency of customers, and average order value would be the kind of key metrics for them.
So they're like a traditional wholesale marketing manager in that they're about building awareness, driving footfall, increasing spend, all the stuff that we are familiar with, but they're using different tools in some respects because their focus is about driving all of that back to your site or your app or whatever it is you're digitally enabled via.
Correct. Yeah. And look, you look at those disciplines I've just described, and you've got someone who's building the product, you've got someone who's bringing people to your product, and you've got someone who's like trying to keep them there and get them to spend more, right? What more could you want out of it, out of a team? Then, like I say, the only thing that underpins all of it, and again, this could be a separate person, or this could be someone that, a skill that we all have, but that kind of data and analytics piece is really important across all those roles. So, the digital marketing discipline, for example, you might think is not as analytical, it's more about communication. But actually, how well do banners perform? How well do emails perform? How many people are clicking through from emails to your website? How many people are clicking through from emails all the way to purchase? The more analytical you can be in digital, the more you can adapt and improve the different areas of your platform to make them much more effective. So that kind of data analysis and really the analytical bit is really important, whether it's a separate role who's someone who's feeding them the information they need, or ideally that they all have that capability within them.
And is that really true that the Malts have got sort of tens of people working on this?
I mean, that's certainly the experience I've had. When I was working at Nestle, I was kind of dealing with, I think at the time it was Waitrose, Sainsbury's, and Co-op were the three customers that I had. So look, it won't be true of all the Malts, but they will have bigger digital teams, or else they'll have enough of a budget that they can go and work with a third party who has kind of 30 people working on it for them. Oh. But yeah, I mean, essentially, yeah, because I mean, there'll be roles, for example, like there'll be people who are solely in charge of merchandising on digital, and how you merchandise and categorize products, etc. There'll probably be 2 or 3 people, maybe more actually, people who are tied in with brand marketing teams who are kind of your digital marketeers. There'll be people who are in charge of SEO, so search engine optimization, and PPC, which are kind of disciplines that within wholesale when I was looking at it, search engine optimization is probably quite important. PPC we didn't do a lot of because it's very difficult. PPC is pay per click, so kind of paid advertising on Google or through social media as well. The issue look, we didn't hugely go into this and really start to explore this when I was at Best Babe, but I guess my gut feel for why that wasn't a priority, unlike my current role, for example, was that it's very difficult to target specifically retailers or food service operators. There's no real ability on Google or Facebook at the moment that allows you to target in a B2B capacity, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it was very difficult. I think every time I thought about it, I was like, it's going to be very difficult to prove effectiveness. But SEO is important. Making sure that your website is built in a way that if people are searching for, where can I buy someone? Who near me? I don't know, like wholesales boxes of beans or tins of beans. Sorry, that's important. So making sure someone's and that again comes into your digital marketing discipline. So they should be someone who understands SEO and knows how to set your sites up to be optimized.
And I think we talked about this before in a general conversation about, I guess as you get more sophisticated with this, you can start to think about exclusive online promotions, and there'll be different types of pack that work on digital that are probably less popular in cash and carry, but are more popular online. So, and then there's the whole content management piece and seasonal stuff, etc. So I guess once you get into this, your team can just grow organically because you start to differentiate your digital offer from your traditional business.
Yeah, I mean, again, absolutely. And like, the great thing is that you can, I mean, I suppose it's no different to in the depot. Like, as demand grows, you can grow your team. I mean, what I've just described, I guess, the disciplines I've just described are the ones that I think are really important to have, like, from the off almost, or, at the beginning of your journey. But then, you can start to adapt it as time goes on. I mean, we essentially had someone whose sole focus was working on supplier marketing campaigns on digital and ensuring that they were set up correctly. And actually, again, like, good example of someone who was really hungry and curious. I mean, he did a great job of working with some suppliers and doing some really innovative things. Like, we had our first kind of ever brand page that he built with Carlsberg, for example, which is just an entire page dedicated to Carlsberg and educating retailers about Carlsberg, as well as giving category advice, educating about the brand, and also a section where they could add Carlsberg products to their basket. So I mean, you can grow your team based on demand, and there's so many different kind of roles you can add on. You can have someone whose sole focus is on search engine optimization. You can have someone whose sole focus is on I'm trying to think, things like, even your product team, you can start to separate out. One person could be responsible for the app, and one person could be responsible for the website, for example. So it just depends on demand and what you can afford.
Cool. Okay. So then we need to talk about, I guess, the final piece, which is how you bed your digital team into an existing traditional wholesale business. So I guess that has a number of ramifications. One is, how do you get the traditional business to embrace digital so that it's not working in a silo? And then there is a piece around working styles of the organisation and how compatible they are with typical digital working styles. So
yeah.
How do we tackle this?
Yeah, this is a tough one because, when you look at it, actually, everything linked to digital is almost the reverse of the traditional wholesale kind of approach. So, like, digital is something you're building. Whilst I was saying, it's very energetic and changing on a day-to-day basis, it's something you're building for the long term. It's not something that is going to show you return immediately. And that's very different to the notion of cash and carry, right? Which is, you buy the product and sell it the next day and make a profit on it. So you need to be patient with it, and you need to give it time. I think I'm trying to remember. There are a couple of other examples that we were discussing, weren't we, about how it can be quite different to, often. I'm not saying it's exclusively the domain of the young, but digital is ideally a lot of the expertise, shall we say, lives with people who have grown up in a digital world, rather than people who are kind of older, who haven't grown up in a digital world in the same way. Like, these guys have literally lived their entire lives surrounded by digital, and they will naturally just have a much better innate ability to understand how digital works. So again, very different to the older kind of the older or the more traditional wholesale model, which is that you're looking for, often you're looking for people who have years of experience within the industry, etc., etc. Here, you're not really looking for people who've got years of. I mean, I certainly wasn't. I wasn't looking for people who had actually any experience within the wholesale industry. It was the reverse, actually. I was looking for people who had experience in e-commerce and in other industries, even things like fashion, because they're the ones who will understand the best way for digital to work within a sector like wholesale.
Yeah, and I think we talked about collaboration as well, how these roles tend to be fairly collaborative. You benchmark, you share best practice, it's emerging and exciting, so you're watching for trends. Whereas again, wholesale tends to be quite protective, doesn't it? I mean, there are examples of collaboration, clearly, but it is a different model.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the other one we talked about was data. Linked to your collaboration point was data, wasn't it? So I remember when I first joined the wholesale industry that people were very protective of their data. And I guess, again, I was someone who's kind of grown up in a more digital world. And I understood, as TWC certainly does as well, how useful data can be when it is shared, how it can give you a much better read of like the market, so you can actually start to benchmark yourself against the market rather than just staying really internal and insular. So yeah, it's really important to be collaborative, and data sharing, I think, is a really key part of that. Obviously, without giving away all your trade secrets. We're not saying give away all your secrets, but certainly in order for you to be able to benefit from understanding how you're playing within the rest of the market, you, as much as everyone else, needs to share data in order to do that.
Yeah, it's a piece I talk about with my clients, and it's a favourite expression of one of my clients, which is, what does good look like? Unless you benchmark, you've got no idea how you're performing.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, your danger is that your benchmark is yourself, which is a false economy.
Yeah, exactly. So coming back to kind of the pitfalls if we don't crack the cultural piece, I guess there's two things. One is that digital ends up sitting in a silo on its own, kind of feared and disliked by the rest of the organisation for being young and trendy and fast-paced. And I guess there is also a piece that we probably need to explore, that as well as sitting on its own, it can be perceived, if you don't think about things like KPIs and organisational structure, you're in danger that it's competing against other bits of your business. Would that be right?
Yeah, I mean, again, definitely. So you've got, it's very easy, I think, for digital to be built into a business as this, like you say, as a silo. Probably my biggest learning that I didn't really pick up on myself, actually. It was a third party kind of consultancy that we were working with who picked up on this, but they really helped me understand how important it is to really integrate digital, not just across the business, but like across the culture of the business. And that's not easy. I mean, that is, I found that very tough, especially in an organization like Bestway, where you've got kind of 4,000 people to get on board. It's not the easiest thing to get right, but it's really important. And the reason that's so important is linked to the second point that you've just said, which is actually what we started to find, at Bestway, for example, is that you ended up having, you're asking depot managers, for example, to push digital and to get customers signed up online. And then what depot managers were seeing was that their numbers were going down because all of a sudden that spend was being attributed to digital and not to their depot. So actually, you almost need to revisit the whole model of how you set KPIs and objectives across the business. That kind of, when I say transforming your kind of culture to integrate digital into it, I'm not just talking about at a base level. I'm talking about at the highest level, actually. How do you integrate digital into how you function as a business? And that was certainly a challenge that we had. It was very, it almost felt like, how was I able to motivate a depot manager to do what I needed them to do that would benefit the business and benefit, obviously, my team, when it was at such a detriment to them. And that, to be honest, that was a really difficult challenge. And we came up with, I thought, quite a good solution in some ways, which was that the digital sales linked, so the customers that were linked to that depot, their digital sales still were attributed to that depot. But even that is not perfect. It's not quite right. It's not kind of, there are probably actions that are being done by the digital team that might be driving that, and yet the depot manager is getting credited for it. Like, how do you, and that's, like I say, that's something I haven't actually come up with a solution for, but definitely across the business, you need to have a think about how KPIs and objectives are set in a way that continues to motivate the digital team, continues to motivate the depot managers as well, and ideally puts you all in one team, so that you're one company and one team, that you're working together rather than working against each other.
I mean, the analogy we used on a separate conversation, actually, which I still think is applicable, there is more complexity to it, but actually is retail club. 15 years ago, retail club was tiny in cash and carry, and then it grew and grew. And actually finding a way to service retail club in such a way that it sits nicely and complementary alongside traditional independent retailers who are unaffiliated is not a dissimilar thing, actually. You've just got to find a way of doing it within your business where it doesn't become competitive, it's complementary.
Exactly, yeah, it's a great comparison, actually. And there's always ways. There's always ways to integrate new additions to the business in that sense. You just need to make sure you give it the thought that it needs, and up front, because it's harder to implement that stuff later down the line. So you want to be, if you're introducing digital into your business, you want people to be really motivated and energized about it. The last thing you want to do is start off by pissing them off, and then you've got your jobs become even harder. Now you've got to find some way of winning them back, convincing them that their initial feeling about it is incorrect, and that's even harder. So I think there's this, and I think the second bit about integrating digital across the business is just about education. Again, really simple but really important. Doesn't seem like it at the time. It feels like, oh, you've got a digital team and they're digital experts and no one else really needs to know. Actually, it's much harder if you approach it that way. It's really important to explain to your training teams, explain to your ops teams exactly how digital works, how it will benefit them, how it benefits their customers, and just ensuring they're aware of changes in processes, etc. as well. But that's it's really important. And again, wholesale's been around for a long time. You've got a lot of people who are much older who work in wholesale, and they won't all know about the ins and outs of how digital works. So in the same way they're teaching you, if you're younger and they're teaching you all about how wholesale works, then it's your job to really help to educate them on how digital works.
So I've amassed my specialist digital team, which might be one person multitasking heavily.
Yeah.
And I'm slowly growing my online footprint, and I've managed not to annoy my depot managers, so they're working in a nice collaborative way with my new digital expert.
You're already doing a better job than me then.
How do I hold on to that expert? Are they going to want flexible working? Are they going to need incentives? Are they going to turn up in jeans and a ripped t-shirt? And do they desperately need to live in Shoreditch in order to do this job?
Well, they don't necessarily need to live in Shoreditch, but I'm sure they all aspire to it. Yeah, I mean, look, again, this was a big clash, I think, when I first joined. I mean, mine was actually more from a marketing perspective, because I'd come from an ad agency, which again was much more, let's say, modern, I guess, in its working practices.
Park Royal's okay, Salih.
Yeah, that's because we've introduced Dress Down Friday. But no, it was a shock to me to have to wear suits every day, for example. And actually, look, this is not the most sexy industry, and it's not going to be easy to attract the best talent, especially in a space like digital, where there's demand for it, where it's an expertise that is really not the sole domain of, but especially prominent in people who are younger and therefore have much more modern outlooks on what work means, what a job means. And I guess, look, that's one of the most important things from a cultural perspective to get right. If you want to attract the right talent, this doesn't necessarily just apply to digital, by the way. I think it applies to young talent across, any team. Then I think it's really important to recognize that, flexible things like flexible working are now commonplace. Working from home is commonplace. I mean, this is my own personal gripe, but wearing a suit, it doesn't mean anything. Like it's this like man-made notion of like, this is what you must wear when you come to work. But actually, I always worked much better when I was more comfortable. So that again is something almost that is expected of people who are sub 30 now, which is it shouldn't really matter unless they work in banking. Really, it shouldn't really matter what they wear to work, as long as they're relatively neat and tidy, right? I'm not saying let them turn up in ripped shorts and but let them be comfortable in what they're wearing. They will expect this, and so you've got to figure out how you bring that into your culture in a positive way, and not in a it could be very easy for it to be seen as, oh, again, we're letting standards slip. It's not about letting standards slip. Actually, the way you communicate it should be in a way that shows like that you're updating your practices to be in line with modern working practices, and it's to benefit ultimately your employees. And I genuinely believe that it will benefit your business overall as well. The happier your employees, the better. But yeah, I mean, particularly important in digital, and a big clash with, I guess, traditionally how business has been run. you need to be very wary that if you want to attract the talent, you've got to set up an environment that they want to be part of and they want to work in.
And yeah, I guess to end on a positive, and without naming names and individuals, it is possible, isn't it? I mean, you attracted someone who had a stellar digital career that I think they were at Ocado before they joined you. So, you know, actually you can win the best talent, I guess, but you've got to put all of the pieces together to make it attractive.
Yeah, I think the hardest part I found was I found the people, and they were brilliant. I absolutely love my team. I had to work. The thing I had to work really hard on was, and like overly work actually more than I would normally, was to keep them during the period of transition, because I knew that there were opportunities. You know, some of them were coming from, I think, you know, the person who was in charge of digital product, who you know, was one of the first people we hired, who was absolutely brilliant. So she had I think her previous role was in, I think the cosmetic industry. She was doing digital in the cosmetic industry and the fashion industry. So, but she was coming from kind of southwest London all the way to Park Royal every day. And so I guess like the way to look at it is it's like a humility thing in some ways, that I felt really honored these people were like, you know, wanted to come and work for this business, especially because it's a family business for me as well. So I never took it for granted, and you know, no one should ever take it for granted. It should always be a case of be grateful that these people choose to come and work for you every day. Not that, you know, oh, I'm giving them a job, so they should be grateful. It's not how it works. But I had to work. I definitely remember that as we were going through like cultural transition and trying to become a more modern working place, I was putting in much more time with my team in terms of just, you know, keeping them positive, keeping them updated when new changes were coming. Almost like hand holding them a bit, just to make sure that they felt that, you know, if anything that might be lacking from a cultural perspective is made up by the support that I'm giving them. So I think, yeah, I think that's it's not always easy, but it's hugely beneficial. And the more time you put in with your team and the more you help develop them and make sure they're happy, the better job they're going to do.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's a top note to end on. So next week, I think we're talking optimization, which will cover basically how to make your site work as well as possible for you within the vision that you've set for it. Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, I guess, look, it's very easy to think that once you've got your website or your app or, you know, whatever digital platform you're building, that's the job done. But really, that's only the start. So hopefully next week we'll be discussing, I guess, what you've got to do in terms of making that asset work harder and harder for you and how you develop it going forward.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, and I shall look forward to speaking to you about it next week. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.